One of our main training components is for understanding child abuse and what to look for. Sometimes you don't realize it, but you're going to encounter students that come to you with accusations or signs of child abuse, and you just need to know what to look for. So child abuse does happen, and it says that 1 in 16 children suffer from child abuse, usually sexual abuse. Over 25% of children are abused are under the age of 3, while over 45% of abused children are under the age of 5, which is a key group of kids that you're going to work with in children's ministry. 3 million reports of child abuse are made each year in the United States, and 90% of child sexual abuse victims know their perpetrator in some way, and 60% are abused by a family member. There's different types of abuse. Physical abuse is bodily injury, physical pain, or impairment. Any sexual act with a child performed by an adult or an older child. Emotional abuse is any act including confinement, isolation, verbal assault, humiliation, intimidation, infantilization, or any other treatment which may diminish the sense of a child's identity, dignity, and self-worth. Neglect is a type of maltreatment that refers to the failure by the caregiver to provide needed, age-appropriate care, although financially able to do so or offered financial or other means to do so. And ritual is an abuse of a child as a part of a ritual associated with occult or religious practices. Generally, a profile of a child molester is known by the child 80% of the time. It takes place in an ongoing relationship, somebody they've known for a long time, and they're generally between 20 and 30 years old. 20% of sexual abuse begins before the age of 18. Child abusers are often married with children of their own, so don't be fooled by somebody saying, well, I have a wife and kids, because that's not always the case of innocence. The reporting system for accidents: when an unintentional act occurs and a child is hurt, a copy of this form is given to parents. So if something happens to a child, make sure that we follow through with the incident and accident form, which is in the link below. Any incidents as far as things that happen here at church, again, you'll fill out the incident form. If a student comes to you about any kind of accusations of abuse at home, we do have to contact the authorities. So you will come to me or Brother David with that paperwork so that we can turn in that to the authorities. If you aren't comfortable speaking to the authorities, we will handle that for you. And again, if you suspect abuse, even if a child doesn't tell you, if you see a child with unnecessary bruises or any kind of behavior that leads you to believe that there's abuse, we also have to report that as well, regardless of whether they tell us or not. And make sure, again, that you fill out the appropriate forms, which are the links below, and turn them into me. When there's questionable behavior, you generally will write the report, you'll turn it into me, and then we'll contact authorities. Generally, you will have to talk to authorities to give them your story, but we can relay most information to the authorities unless the case turns into something. You will need to write the report if there's an incident, and make sure that we have a copy of that report so that we can turn it into the parents. The report is generally filed with the Department of Family and Protective Services. However, we do call the authorities so that they can start an investigation. So if there's anything going on, they can go ahead and take care of that situation before the kids get put back in that environment. Also, we'll notify the pastor so he's aware of the situation. And then all of that is kept confidential. It's not shared with anybody else outside of the staff. General operating procedures. So the 2-person rule, of course, no adult can be alone with any child at any time. 2 adults per 1 child, or 2 children per 1 adult. Make sure that if you're in a room with a child by themselves, maybe counseling or leading them to the Lord, make sure you leave the door open so that there's no false allegation that can be made. We do not leave anyone under 18 in charge of any group of students without an adult being present. 4 years older than a supervised group. So no, we won't let a preteen take care of a third grader because the age gap is not big enough. Volunteers and staff will wear name tags or identifying clothing. We generally wear 22-6 kids shirts anytime we have an event, so that people can identify who the workers are. Appropriate touch policies. Make sure that you're loving on the kids, but make sure you're careful how you're hugging and the kind of clothing that you're wearing. So if you have a kid sitting on your lap and you're wearing a skirt, it may not look appropriate. Try to do side hugs instead of full frontal hugs. Just for the outside world looking in, it doesn't look appropriate. Sometimes we just want to make sure we're guarding against everything we possibly can so it doesn't look like anything's going on. And release a child to an appropriate adult. We don't release students to youth workers unless the youth worker is the one that dropped them off. Generally, we have parents that have to pick them up. If you have a parent that pulls up in the car, the parent does have to come in and pick up their child. We cannot let the child just walk out into the parking lot. So if you have problems with that happening, just notify me so I can talk to the parent. Okay, so ministry-specific procedures. So if we take off-site trips, maybe a trip to Dallas for an end-of-the-year party, or if we stay overnight at camp or something, we always make sure that we have enough male and female volunteers to fit the amount of children that we have going. That is usually specific to each event that we go to. We always have a parent's written permission for that student to go on a van or to go out of town with the adults that are going. Any restroom activity, again, if you have to take a child to the restroom, if they have an accident, make sure that you, again, are taking 2 children to the restroom, or 2 adults are taking 1 child to the restroom, so that we are keeping everything clear. If you have any accidents, make sure you notify the parents that there's been an accident so that they can bring clothes for their child to change into. Just make sure we fill out any incident forms if we have to leave wet clothes on children. Restroom visits with bigger kids. Make sure it's 2 at a time, 2 children go into the restroom, 2 girls, 2 boys, and try to make sure you leave the classroom door open so that you can hear them in the hallway to make sure they're not playing or anything in the restroom. We do not need to assist older children unless there's an emergency. If they're having a problem, if they're sick or something like that, that's a special occasion. Just make sure you also have two adults in there at that point too. Discipline basics, just make sure you're using positive words. Make sure you establish the rules and expectations up front. We generally go over these at the beginning of each year, but we evaluate them and tell them again probably mid-year. Make sure that if you're having to tell a parent that their kid acted up, that you're reinforcing it with something they did good to correct the behavior, or something good they did throughout the night, so that we're not always ending it with the negative. And of course, your 3 strikes and you're out policy, make sure we're following that for every child, not just 1 or 2 children. Make sure that we're consistent in how we're handling behavior problems. And again, why is this all necessary? Because we want to make sure that we're protecting our children and our volunteers from any kind of misleadership. Make sure we're giving them a good foundation and we're supporting them. Plus, it also protects the church from any kind of lawsuits or any kind of liability issues.